a silence between them, until that one night changed everything. The golden lights of the Toronto Film Festival shimmered like fireflies on the red carpet as Keanu Reeves stepped out of the sleek black vehicle. Cameras flashed, fans screamed, and yet his eyes scanned the crowd for just one person. Not a producer, not a fan, not even a journalist, but her. Sandra Bullock. For over 2 decades, their names had been tied together like twin stars orbiting the same gravity of cinematic legacy and shared history. Their roles in Speed, the chemistry in the lake house, and all the moments off-screen, the laughs, the silences, the missed timings, it had all led to this moment. But tonight wasn't about a film premiere. It was about the question neither had dared to ask. What if we had spoken from the heart earlier? Milky Way, a past written in pauses. They had danced around each other for years, emotionally, spiritually, even professionally. While tabloids spun tales and fans shipped them like a perfect love story, both Keanu and Sandra had guarded their hearts like 2 old castles, weathered by storms, but still standing. They had felt the pull, of course. How could they not? Their conversations always went deeper than most Hollywood small talk. Whether they were waiting on set or bumping into each other during off-camera charity work, their exchanges were never casual. Keanu would notice the small tremor in Sandra's laugh when she was tired. Sandra could detect the slight sadness behind Keanu's kind smile. But they never crossed the line. Or maybe they never had the courage to. Timing, Sandra had once whispered to Ellen DeGeneres in an old interview, is everything, and we never had it. Keanu in his own interviews often paused when asked about her. He would start, then smile as if language had failed him for a moment. Sandra is rare. Night with Stars, the whisper before the premiere. Back in the Grand Theater lobby, Sandra arrived. Dressed in a simple yet elegant black gown, hair pulled back, no unnecessary glamour, just authenticity, just her. And Keanu saw her. For a moment the crowd disappeared. He stepped forward, she looked up, and something passed between them, not words, not gestures, but a lifetime of pauses suddenly bursting into meaning. You came, Keanu said softly. I had to, Sandra replied. They hugged longer than cameras could capture, and deeper than Hollywood could comprehend. Inside, the film was about to begin. But outside, on the balcony just above the red carpet, Keanu and Sandra found themselves standing side by side, away from the flash, the press, and the expectations. I've been thinking about what you said at the charity dinner, Sandra began. Keanu turned to her, nodding slightly. You said, sometimes we think silence protects what matters most, but maybe silence is what keeps us apart. He looked at her now as if seeing her anew, and I meant it. Candle what was left unsaid. There were too many chapters left unwritten. The time they almost co-starred again, but the script fell through. The time Keanu sent her flowers for no reason, just because she once mentioned she'd never received them from a co-star. The time Sandra almost called him after her divorce, but hesitated at the last second. And the time Keanu almost reached out after his sister passed, thinking only Sandra would truly understand the silence that grief brings. But tonight something cracked. Maybe it was age, maybe it was the accumulated weight of almosts. Or maybe they were just done waiting. Why didn't we talk like this before? Sandra asked, not accusingly, but like someone unlocking an old door. Keanu looked down, then back at her. Because I was afraid I'd lose the one real thing I had left in this industry, you. She smiled, eyes glistening. And I was afraid you'd already moved on. They both laughed, the kind of laugh that soaked in truth, not humor, and then there was silence again. But this time, it wasn't the kind that kept them apart. This silence was sacred. Wilted flower, a whisper from the past. Later that evening, the premiere went on. Fans raved, critics clapped. But something else had begun, not a new movie, but a long overdue conversation. In the hotel lounge, hours later, away from the crowd, Sandra reached into her bag and pulled out an old letter. I found this last week while cleaning up old scripts. I never sent it, she said. Keanu unfolded it. The paper was worn, the ink faded. It was dated 2007. In it, Sandra had written about regret, about love never expressed, about how she wished they'd met not as co-stars, but as strangers in a quiet bookstore, so they could start without expectations, without timing. Keanu looked up, visibly shaken. I wrote something too, he said. Never gave it to you. He pulled out his phone and read an old note saved under the title, SB, What I Never Said. Sandra's eyes widened. You kept that all these years. I kept you, he whispered. And for a long moment, neither said a word. Because now they didn't need to. She read his letter twice, then looked into his eyes as if seeing him for the first time. The letter sat between them on the table like a silent witness to years of unspoken words. Keanu's voice still echoed in Sandra's ears, not just the content of his message, but the rawness, the honesty, the vulnerability behind it. She hadn't seen this version of him before, not in interviews, not on set, and not even during the rare private moments they had shared. This wasn't the Zen Keanu the media portrayed. This was a man who had buried years of emotion beneath layers of discipline, silence, and duty. And now, all that restraint had been stripped away in one gentle, soul-bearing confession. Sandra picked up the phone, scrolled to the note titled SB, What I Never Said, and read it again. Every line felt like it was wrapped in memories. He had written about the day they finished filming the lake house and how he sat in the car for over an hour, unwilling to drive away because something in his gut told him it wasn't just the end of a shoot. It was the closing of a door he hadn't even dared to knock on. He wrote about seeing her on TV a year later, laughing at a joke during an award show, and how it felt like hearing a song he used to know by heart. He wrote about moments he remembered that she had likely forgotten, like how she once gave her jacket to a freezing assistant on set without saying a word, or how she always carried a small notebook filled with scribbled notes about kindness quotes and things she overheard people say. And then came the line that shattered her. I stayed quiet all these years because I didn't want to be one more thing in your life you had to carry. Sandra put the phone down. Her hands trembled, but it wasn't fear. It was awakening. A realization that she had underestimated the depth of his care. All this time, she thought she had kept things in balance by not complicating their friendship. But now she understood that silence wasn't safety. It was missed chances. She looked at him across the candlelit table. He was quiet, eyes slightly distant, as if bracing himself for her response. I had no idea, she finally said, her voice almost a whisper. Keanu, I had no idea you saw me that clearly. He gave a soft, almost embarrassed smile. That's the thing about people who care quietly. We see everything. We just don't always believe we deserve to say it out loud. Sandra leaned back and exhaled. She was fighting tears now, not because she was hurt, but because she realized that this moment had been waiting for them for years, maybe even decades. She didn't know whether to laugh or cry, so she did both. Keanu reached across the table, gently taking her hand. It wasn't romantic in the conventional sense. It was sacred. Two souls reaching across a timeline of almosts and could-have-beens. Why now? She asked him, voice steadier now. Why tonight? He thought for a moment, eyes locked into hers. Because I realized I'd rather risk losing your friendship than keep pretending I don't carry you with me everywhere I go. The room fell into silence again, but unlike before, it was alive, charged. They didn't need violins or poetic background music. The truth was enough. The moment was enough. Sandra stood and walked to the glass window overlooking the city. Toronto's lights shimmered in the distance. Below, the noise of the city buzzed, cars honking, laughter from a patio bar, someone playing saxophone on a corner. Keanu joined her, standing beside her without saying a word. You know what's strange? She said finally. The world thinks we're both so composed, that we've mastered this life thing. But sometimes I feel like I'm still 25, terrified, unsure, and always asking myself if I missed the one connection that really mattered. He didn't answer, not immediately. He just placed his hand gently on the window pane, beside hers, not quite touching but close enough that she could feel the heat radiate from his palm. I used to think we had time, he said. But life doesn't always give you a heads up when the clock's about to run out. Sandra looked at him sharply. There was something in his tone, something final. Are you okay? She asked. He nodded, then hesitated. I'm okay, but I've been thinking a lot lately about legacy, about peace, about leaving things unsaid. And I didn't want us to be one of those regrets I carry into the next chapter. Her heart clenched. She had known loss. She had known grief. And she could sense when someone was speaking not from desperation, but from clarity. Keanu wasn't desperate. He wasn't trying to ignite a romance or reignite a flame. He was simply laying the truth bare, not to change the past, but to free them both from it. I don't want to carry this in silence anymore either, she said finally. Then, without thinking, without rehearsing, Sandra turned and did something neither of them expected. She embraced him, fully, completely, as if the hug itself was an apology for every unspoken word, every missed opportunity, every year of self-imposed distance. And Keanu held her. He didn't ask for anything more, he didn't interpret it, he didn't label it. He just held her, and the world outside went quiet. Shooting star memories that were never lost. That night they didn't go their separate ways. They stayed in the lounge until well past midnight, talking about everything and nothing. They shared stories from their childhood. Sandra talked about growing up in Germany, always feeling like the outsider, the girl who smiled too much and asked too many questions. Keanu opened up about moving around constantly, about his father's absence, and the way loneliness can become a language only a few people understand. They laughed about silly things. The time a co-star's dog ruined a scene by jumping into frame. The way Keanu always brought a book of philosophy to the set while Sandra carried crossword puzzles. They marveled at how they had drifted in and out of each other's orbits for years, always close but never colliding. Maybe we weren't supposed to collide, Keanu said at one point. Maybe we were meant to orbit each other until we were both strong enough to meet in the middle. Sandra stared at him for a long time. Or maybe, she said, we were just stubborn. They both laughed, this time fully. Performing arts, the world doesn't know everything. The next morning, photos of them at the premiere had gone viral. Fans were speculating. Tabloids were spinning stories. Social media was ablaze with hashtags, Keandra, the Lake House reunion, Keanu and Sandra finally. But what the world didn't know, and maybe never would, was what had truly happened that night. Not a romance, not a confession, but something more powerful. A reckoning. A soul-level acknowledgement that love isn't always loud. Sometimes it lives in the pauses, in the letters never sent, in the glances that last just a little too long. And in the hands held quietly beneath the table, while the world watches something else entirely. She took off the mask she wore for years, and he was still there, waiting. The next few days passed like a quiet symphony. No grand gestures, no paparazzi-fueled spectacle, just a gentle unfolding between two people who had stopped pretending. After the film premiere, Sandra returned to her rented apartment in Toronto's historic Annex neighborhood. Keanu, ever the low-profile wanderer, remained tucked in a quiet loft by the lake, not far from the lighthouse that always reminded him of the lake house. It was poetic, and maybe even ironic, how after years of mistiming, they now found themselves just a few streets apart. But something had changed. Not the world around them. It was still spinning on its usual chaotic axis. But the way they looked at that world and each other had shifted. In the quiet morning hours, while Sandra sipped her coffee by the window, she found herself staring at the text thread between them, her thumb hovering over the keyboard. There was no pressure, no expectation. Just a mutual acknowledgement that the dam had finally broken and the waters of truth were flowing freely. That afternoon, she texted him, "Walk with me." 10 minutes later, Keanu replied, "Already lacing my boots." They met at Trinity Bellwoods Park. Not a glamorous location, not even particularly private, but that was the point. For once, they weren't playing parts. There were no handlers, no bodyguards, no curated personas. Just Keanu in his worn leather jacket and Sandra in a casual wool coat, her hair pulled back in a low bun, no makeup, no mask. As they walked beneath the rows of changing maple trees, the burnt oranges and deep reds of autumn mirrored the internal shift in both of them. It wasn't just nostalgia anymore. It was clarity. "I never told you what happened in 2011, Sandra said suddenly. Keanu looked at her, curious but patient. "What happened?" "I almost quit the industry." He slowed his pace. "After my divorce, after the miscarriage, after the tabloids made a circus out of my pain," she continued, eyes fixed on the path. "I would wake up and feel like a fraud, like I was performing even when the cameras weren't rolling. I smiled at interviews, I made jokes on red carpets, but inside I was hollow." Keanu didn't say a word. He just walked beside her, his presence a silent fortress. "You know what stopped me?" she asked, a faint smile curving her lips. "It was you." He turned toward her now, brow furrowed in quiet surprise. "I saw a photo of you at a children's hospital in LA, no press, no headlines. Just you in character as Neo, sitting on the edge of a sick boy's bed, listening to him like he was the most important person in the world. And I thought to myself, that's what it means to be human in this industry. That's the anchor I've been missing. Keanu exhaled, stunned. He had no idea anyone had seen that moment. He'd slipped in and out of the hospital without fanfare. The photo had leaked quietly and disappeared just as quickly. But to her, it had meant everything. And when I saw that, Sandra continued, I realized I didn't have to pretend anymore. I could still stay. I could still tell stories, but I didn't have to wear the mask 24/7. She stopped walking and looked him in the eye. You saved me, and you never even knew it. Keanu's throat tightened. There were no prepared lines for this, no movie script to draw from, only truth, and truth was sometimes terrifying in its simplicity. I'm glad you stayed, he said finally. The world's better with your stories in it. I'm better with your stories in mine. She smiled, a real unguarded smile. They kept walking. Candle truth in fragments. Later that evening, they sat on a park bench as the sun dipped beneath the skyline. The city lights began to twinkle. The rustle of the wind, the occasional bark of a dog, and the fading laughter of children echoed around them. You know, Keanu said, staring into the distance, I used to think healing came all at once, like a grand realization or some spiritual thunderbolt. Sandra looked over at him, and now? Now I think healing comes in fragments, in quiet walks, in letters never sent, in people who don't run when you finally take the mask off. Sandra's eyes shimmered. Then maybe today we picked up another fragment. He nodded. Yeah, maybe we did. There was a silence between them again, but this time it wasn't hiding anything. It was rich, peaceful, sacred. Sandra turned to him. Do you ever regret not exploring this? You and me, I mean, beyond just friendship. Keanu looked down, then met her gaze. All the time. His honesty hit her like a soft wave, not aggressive, just undeniable. But maybe, he continued, it wasn't about timing or fear. Maybe we were just waiting until we could see each other, not through the lens of what the world wanted, but for who we really were. Broken, tired, kind, resilient. She whispered, and still here. He smiled, and still here. Clapper bored the decision. As they stood to leave, Keanu reached into his coat pocket and handed her a small, aged photograph. Sandra took it, puzzled, then gasped. It was from Speed, a behind-the-scenes moment she'd forgotten. Keanu had his arm around her shoulders, both of them laughing mid-scene, her head thrown back, eyes shut, utterly free. You kept this? She asked, stunned. He nodded. It reminded me that there was a time when you laughed like that, when we both did. And I promised myself one day if I ever saw you again with that look in your eyes, I'd do everything I could to make sure it stayed. Sandra clutched the photo to her chest. Something shifted in her posture, less guarded, more open. I don't know what this is, she said slowly, but I don't want it to fade again. Then let's not name it, Keanu replied. Let's just keep walking together. As they left the park, the sky now a soft navy blue, Sandra slipped her arm gently through his. Not as lovers, not as actors, just as two people who had finally put their truths on the table and discovered something rare. Not just a connection, but a return. To themselves. To each other. To something worth holding. And somewhere deep inside, the world fell silent again. Not out of shock, but out of reverence. She let her walls fall, and for the first time, someone stayed long enough to see her soul. It was almost midnight when Sandra found herself standing alone on the small balcony of her apartment. A mug of untouched chamomile tea sat beside her on the railing, cooling in the autumn air. Below, the quiet city of Toronto was asleep, its humming arteries dulled under the weight of the late hour. Streetlights flickered. Leaves drifted to the pavement like silent memories. But inside her chest, something had awakened. It wasn't love in the conventional, boxed-in, romanticized sense. What stirred in her now was something rarer, something she hadn't felt in decades, a strange, raw calm. The kind of calm that comes when someone finally sees you. Not your makeup, not your polished smile, not your resume, but you, the stuttering heart beneath the image, the girl inside the woman. And Keanu had seen her. The thought both frightened and comforted her. She wasn't used to being known without performing. For years, she had been everyone's strength. Her friends leaned on her fans adored her, her team relied on her. But it had been so long since someone had stood still long enough to ask, Who holds you when you're tired? Keanu hadn't asked with words. He had asked with presence, with patience, with a listening that wasn't performative, with silence that held space, not judgment. She stared out into the skyline, her thoughts drifting back to their walk that afternoon. His voice still lingered in her mind. Let's not name it. Let's just keep walking, together. She hadn't realized how thirsty her soul had been for that kind of partnership. Not control, not demands, but quiet companionship. The kind that walks beside you, not ahead. The kind that doesn't try to fix your wounds, but sits with you until the bleeding stops. Her phone vibrated gently on the table beside her. One message. Keanu, you up? A soft laugh escaped her lips, as if he knew, as if he always did. She typed back. Yes, come over. No hesitation, no calculation, no fear. Crescent moon a conversation without scripts. 15 minutes later, the familiar knock echoed through her hallway. No security detail. No handlers, just him in a hoodie and jeans carrying 2 cups of hot cocoa from the corner bodega. She smiled as she opened the door, her eyes soft, her walls, those legendary press-built walls, now lowered. Thought you could use something sweet, he said with that half-smile that always gave away more than it hid. I was just thinking the same thing, she replied, taking the cup and stepping aside to let him in. They settled on the balcony, side by side, wrapped in shared silence. The kind that required no fillers, just breath, just presence. I was thinking, Sandra said after a few minutes, about what you said earlier, about healing coming in fragments. Keanu turned toward her, listening. I think you were right, she continued. But I also think healing comes when someone finally says, you don't have to carry this alone, and means it. Keanu nodded slowly. I do mean it, I always have. Her eyes welled up, not with sadness, but with a kind of gratitude that came from deep in the bones. A gratitude reserved for those rare people who show up when the cameras are off, when the makeup is gone, when the laughter is exhausted. You're not just kind, she whispered, you're constant. Keanu looked down at his cup, his voice low. I haven't always been. She raised an eyebrow. You haven't. He shook his head. I've walked away from things before, from people, not because I didn't care, but because I didn't know how to stay when things got real. I was always better at silence than presence, until now. Sandra placed her hand on his. You're doing just fine. They sat like that for what felt like an hour, letting the air between them fill with the weight of truths finally unburdened. Open book echoes from the past. At one point, Sandra stood and disappeared into her living room. When she returned, she carried a small wooden box. It was worn, chipped at the corners, and clearly older than anything else in the apartment. I haven't opened this in years, she said, setting it between them. It's full of letters I wrote but never sent, to people I've lost, people I've loved, people I never had the courage to tell the truth to. Keanu's face softened. Can I? She nodded. Pick one. He reached in and pulled out an envelope dated 1996. The year Speed came out. Inside, he found a single page, neatly written, no scratch-outs, as if the words had come easily. Keanu, you'll never know what today meant to me. Watching you check on every crew member before leaving set, making sure the coffee guy had gloves, telling the makeup assistant she was doing great. No one saw that. But I did. And it made me feel safe in a place that usually makes me feel small. If I ever forget why I do this work, I'll remember today. Yes. Keanu looked up, stunned. You wrote this the day of the final scene. She nodded. I remember that day, he said. You were quiet. I thought you were just tired. I was, she whispered, but I was also trying not to feel too much. Keanu folded the letter and handed it back. No, she said, keep it. It always belonged to you. Sunrise, the breaking of dawn. By the time the sun began to rise, casting pale gold over the rooftops, Sandra and Keanu were still on that balcony. They hadn't slept. They hadn't needed to. The world below them was waking up, but they felt like they were still inside a dream. Only this one didn't vanish with morning light. It stayed. It settled. Are we okay? Sandra asked as the first birds began to chirp. Keanu turned to her, voice steady, gaze clear. We're better than okay. We're real. She leaned into his shoulder, resting her head there like it was the most natural thing in the world. I don't know what this will become, she murmured, but I know I don't want to lose it. You won't, he promised. Whatever we are, we're not built on pretending. She closed her eyes. For the first time in years, she wasn't bracing for heartbreak. She wasn't performing. She wasn't surviving. She was simply breathing. With him, and somewhere in the quiet rhythms of morning, with the city slowly stretching into another chaotic day, two souls who had walked parallel for decades finally rested in the same place, unlabeled, unafraid, and profoundly, beautifully seen. He took her hand in public, and she didn't pull away this time. 3 days after that long, quiet night on Sandra's balcony, something changed, not between them, but around them. The world outside had started to notice. Maybe it was the way she smiled differently at a press conference, or how he no longer deflected every question about relationships with a cryptic joke. Or perhaps it was something even simpler, the stillness between them when they were in the same frame. It wasn't performative, it wasn't curated, it was just peace. The internet, of course, spun its usual tales. Rumors flared up, memes popped up, fans cheered and speculated. But neither Sandra nor Keanu flinched, not this time. For once, they had nothing to hide, not because they owed the world an explanation, but because the truth no longer scared them. They didn't have to declare anything. They just had to show up again and again as they truly were. And that's exactly what Keanu did. On the evening of the Real Hearts Foundation Gala, a major charity event hosted annually in Los Angeles to raise funds for underprivileged filmmakers, Sandra arrived alone, as always, her hair swept back in a simple knot, wearing a midnight blue gown that shimmered like ocean waves under stage light. Her team had planned everything, her seat, her speech, her photo ops. It was business as usual. Until he walked in. Not fashionably late, not dramatically early. Just timed like he always was, invisible to the noise but unforgettable to the moment. Keanu, dressed in a classic black suit with no tie, his hair loose and falling slightly over his shoulders, greeted no one on his way in. He simply scanned the room once, eyes like sonar, and when he spotted her, he walked straight toward her. Sandra turned, sensing him before seeing him, like two notes of the same melody finally syncing up in a song. And as the cameras subtly began to turn in their direction, he did something unexpected. He reached out and took her hand. Not as a public stunt, not for the cameras, but because it was time. Because some things, when they've been buried long enough, finally deserve the light. Sandra didn't pull away. She didn't flinch, she didn't blush. She didn't calculate the media outcome. She simply closed her fingers around his and nodded. The strength in her grip said more than any headline ever could. They walked side by side to their seats, sat through the ceremony in shared silence, and exchanged only a few words. But those words carried the weight of years. "You look calm," he said under his breath. "I am," she whispered, "for the first time in a very long time." Mantelpiece when the world isn't watching. Later that night, after the gala ended and the guests had scattered back into their luxury cars and chaotic post-event chatter, Keanu and Sandra remained. Not inside the venue, but outside, on the balcony of the old Art Deco building where the event was held. They leaned on the stone railing, side by side, staring at the moon above the LA skyline. It looked smaller than usual, half shrouded in cloud, but it didn't matter. The real illumination came from their shared stillness. "I used to think this city only saw me when I was playing someone else," Sandra said, her voice hushed, almost carried away by the wind. "I was always America's sweetheart, or the box office queen, or the comeback star. Never Sandra, just Sandra." Keanu nodded, understanding her without needing to interject. "And now," he asked. She smiled. "Now I think someone sees me when I'm not performing, and that changes everything." He turned to her slowly. "You do the same for me. I stopped performing the moment I met you. I just didn't know how to say it until now." They didn't kiss. They didn't hold each other dramatically under the stars. They didn't need to. What they had wasn't a romance written for screens. It was a revelation born in years of quiet gestures and unsent letters. Videocassette the tape she never watched. The next morning, Sandra invited Keanu to her home again, this time with a very specific reason. "I want to show you something," she said as they stood in her cozy den, lined with bookshelves, old movie scripts, and dusty trophies. She pulled out an old VHS tape. The label was handwritten, "Rap Day, Lake House BTS." Keanu raised an eyebrow. "Behind the scenes." She nodded. "I've never watched it. I've had it for years. One of the assistant editors gave it to me as a gift, said it had a few candid moments of us, moments we probably didn't even realize were caught on camera. They inserted the tape into the old player, and the screen flickered to life. Grainy footage filled the television, a younger Sandra and Keanu laughing in between takes, tossing snow at each other like children, sharing thermoses of coffee, improvising dialogue, dancing to no music in the middle of a frozen lake set. One scene made Sandra pause the tape. It was a quiet moment, Keanu standing off to the side, watching her from a distance as she delivered a scene. His expression was unreadable to most, but not to her. Not now, she saw it clearly. He had been in awe. Not of her fame, not of her talent, but of her soul. "You were watching me," she said, turning to him. He didn't deny it. "I always was." Luggage the suitcase. That evening, Keanu brought a suitcase to her place, not as a gesture of moving in, but as a story. "I want to show you something too," he said. From the suitcase, he pulled out items he'd kept over the years, an old call sheet from their first film, a photo of Sandra napping on set with a blanket over her head, a coffee mug she'd once left in his trailer that said, "Try again tomorrow." Even the tiny compass necklace she gave the crew as a farewell gift, his was still wrapped in the original paper. "You kept all this?" she whispered, stunned. "I didn't know why at the time," he said. "I just couldn't let it go." Sandra sat beside him, holding the compass. She read the tiny inscription on the back for the first time, "Find your way back, S." Her eyes shimmered. "You did," she said. And he nodded. "So did you." Milky Way, what comes after. That night they didn't talk about the future, not directly, but something shifted. They began speaking in terms of we. "We should take that road trip we always joked about. We should visit that bookstore in Oregon you told me about. We should write something together, not a film, something real." There was no grand decision, no declaration, just a quiet crossing of some invisible bridge neither had known how to step onto before. As they sat together, the city outside moving like clockwork, cars, people, deadlines, they realized that they had found something rare. Not a second chance at love, but a first chance at honesty. Keanu turned to her one last time before they called it a night. "Whatever this becomes," he said, "thank you for not running." Sandra reached for his hand, her grip steady and warm. "Thank you for staying long enough for me to open the door." And for the first time in a very long time, she slept without fear. Not because someone had promised to love her forever, but because someone had finally said, "I see you," and stayed. The world watched silently, but they only had eyes for each other. It was late November in Kyoto, Japan. The trees had surrendered to the season. Red maple leaves fluttered along the philosopher's path like soft confetti scattered by time itself. Tourists strolled quietly through the Zen gardens, lost in their own meditations. And nestled within the serenity of the hills just beyond the city, Keanu and Sandra found themselves walking side by side again. But this time, it was no longer in search of answers. It was simply to be. They had decided, quietly, to travel together, not as a couple, not as actors, not for promotion or press. Just as two people who had spent decades circling each other, finally willing to explore what existed in the calm after the storms of their lives. And Kyoto, with its sacred silences and temple bells, became their sanctuary. They stayed in a modest ryokan, one of those traditional inns where the windows slid open to reveal bamboo groves and nothing more. No staff interrupted. No fans found them. For the first time, they existed in a space untouched by Hollywood, untethered by legacy. No makeup, no meetings, no scripts, just rice paper walls, the scent of pine, and quiet bowls of miso soup shared before sunrise. One morning, as the mist still hung low over the rooftops, Sandra sat cross-legged near the window, sipping tea. Keanu watched her from behind, marveling, not at her fame or her form, but at the stillness she had grown into, at the way she no longer seemed to carry her old armor. "Are you happy?" he asked softly. She turned, startled but smiling. "I think I am, not the Hollywood happy, the real kind, the kind that whispers instead of shouts." He joined her on the floor, legs crossed, eyes level with hers. "What changed?" he asked. Sandra looked out the window, her gaze soft. "I stopped needing to be adored by the world and started allowing myself to be accepted by one person who sees me clearly." Keanu's chest rose and fell with a quiet breath. He knew the feeling intimately. For years, he had given love in silence. He had lost people he couldn't save, carried pain he never advertised. But now, here in this quiet moment with her, he realized that the act of being seen and staying was the closest thing to salvation he had ever known. Of a temple and a truth. That afternoon, they visited a quiet Shinto shrine nestled in the woods. A local priest nodded to them politely as they entered, unaware of their celebrity or perhaps simply uninterested. Keanu and Sandra took off their shoes, bowed respectfully, and lit a candle each. They didn't pray for success, or love, or even peace. They just stood in front of the sacred flame for several minutes, breathing in the scent of incense and knowing, without saying it, that this was what they had been chasing for years. Not a partner, not a perfect story, but a sense of home. Keanu broke the silence. "You know what I regret?" Sandra looked at him. "What?" "That we spent so long protecting each other from the truth." She considered his words. "Do you think we weren't ready?" He shrugged gently. "Maybe, or maybe we thought the truth would break what we had, but it didn't." "It healed it," she whispered. He nodded, and for a moment they stood side by side beneath a wooden torii gate, two souls reborn not through passion or fireworks, but through presence. Movie camera the letter to no one. That night Sandra wrote a letter, not to Keanu, not to the world, just to herself. "Dear Sandra, you made it not to the top of the industry, not to the perfect love story, but to something better. You found stillness. You found someone who didn't need you to sparkle to stay. You found silence that didn't threaten you but held you like a prayer. You no longer perform to be loved. You exist, and it is enough. Thank you for not giving up when the noise got too loud. And thank you for choosing to believe in slow-burning, soul-deep connection when everyone else told you to move faster. He didn't save you, you didn't save him. You saved each other. Keep going, the real story starts now." "You." She folded the letter and placed it in her journal without telling him. It wasn't for sharing, it was for anchoring. Luggage, the return, and the pause. When they returned to Lowe's Angels, nothing outwardly had changed. There were no magazine covers, no announcement, no red carpet appearance arm in arm. But those who knew them, really knew them, noticed. The way Sandra looked people in the eye more. The way Keanu's silences no longer carried a weight of loneliness, but reflection. The way their phones didn't ring as often because they no longer needed the buzz of the outside world to feel important. They spent more time together, at her home, in his motorcycle garage, at the shelter where Keanu volunteered quietly every Sunday. One afternoon while walking in Griffith Park, Sandra turned to him and asked, "Are we something now?" Keanu stopped, not out of shock but reverence. He took her hand, thumb brushing over her knuckles. "We're what happens when you stop running from something that's been quietly waiting for you the whole time." She smiled. "Then I'm done running." "So am I." They didn't need labels, or timelines, or expectations. They were, for the first time in their lives, emotionally fluent. And free. Globe showing Europe, Africa, the final scene. Months later, they stood together at a small, private benefit gala in San Francisco. Not as a couple. Not as Keanu Reeves and Sandra Bullock, Hollywood icons. Just as two people who had finally found their center and had chosen to stand in it. When Sandra gave her speech that night, she didn't read from a teleprompter. She simply said, "I spent years building walls because I thought they made me strong, but someone reminded me that strength isn't how long you can go without breaking. It's who stays with you when you finally do." Keanu, seated in the crowd, didn't clap louder than anyone else. But his eyes, they spoke volumes. After the event, when they stepped out into the crisp night air, a young woman from the press ran up to them. "Excuse me," she said breathlessly, "can I just ask, what's your relationship, really?" Sandra glanced at Keanu, amused. He gave her a small shrug, letting her decide. She turned to the reporter, her voice gentle but firm. "We're the kind of relationship that doesn't need to be explained to anyone." And hand in hand, they walked away into the city lights, two hearts that had finally stopped searching, not because they found perfection, but because they chose presence. Because sometimes, the loudest love story is the one that doesn't need to be told. Just lived. The end.